Reactive Training Systems.
Everyone, welcome back to the RTS podcast. I got an interesting talk for you today. We're talking about peaking for competitions. And of course, we go into a lot of detail on how we do it here, different things that you may or may not have heard about, how other coaches and other peaking techniques work. And then, as is our way, we kind of let the conversation ramble in a lot of different directions. And it's really interesting. I hope you enjoy it. One thing that does come up later on in the podcast, we'll talk about different online training tools and things of that nature that we have available for you. If you're interested in any of these tools, they're free for you to use, free for anybody to use. You just go to reactivetrainingsystems.com, you log in, click on apps, and there they are. You know, a whole suite of training tools available for you to use to hopefully help you make better training decisions for free. We've got a training log, athlete monitoring system in track. You can track your body weight, so body weight changes, and run reports on your training, and so on and so on. And the idea is that it helps you to put the right weight on the bar and lift it the right number of times. And as I said, that's available for anybody to use. That comes up a bit later on in the podcast. But anyway, that's all I've got for you guys as far as an intro. So here we are talking about peaking for competitions.
Well, I actually have a peaking question related to the World Games then, actually. So if someone just competed at IPF Worlds 4 weeks ago, how would you, and then they're competing at the World Games, what kind of peaking strategy would you use to have them peak twice for IPF Worlds and then the World Games?
That's a good question.
So
Anybody?
that's theoretical because I don't think anybody competed at Raw. No, one person did that I know.
Anna Rosa Castellano.
Yeah. She's at 72 lifter, right?
Yeah, but you know what
Yes.
she weighed in at? She weighed in super light, and funny enough, and this
She weighed in at super light at IPF Worlds or at the World Games?
both. So she weighed in super light, and she ended up beating Priscilla on body weight.
Ah.
And so there was speculation at IPF Raw Worlds that she was doing that for that reason. And so that didn't pan out because she weighed in super light when she competed Raw. But so there's clearly strategy, and apparently she was training in that area for a while. There was some kind of reciprocal deal with Russia, and where's she from again? She's Brazil, something. Yeah. So those are little side notes, but I'm sure that all contributed to her peaking strategy.
Yeah. And Bonica Lau did both as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if Krzysztof Wierzbicki is doing both.
Right.
He's an interesting one. So he was a light 105 at Raw Worlds. And I suppose to get his slot for the World Games, he needed to be a 120. So he has kind of eaten up until he's like 105.1, I think is what he weighed in at. I know that there was some kind of discussion about that. 105.07. Just barely getting into that.
Right.
You know? I mean, you do what you've got to, but I don't know. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. No, those are all strategies, but they're probably not peaking strategies. It's not something that you'd recommend to people. I'm thinking about what I would do. I'd just probably have them, like, one meet would be more of a train through meet. It's hard to peak twice because then you've got that. Peaking means that you've got an up and then a down. And so my thinking would be to train through one and then really work to peak the other, or two smaller peaks.
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna depend a bit on the lifter and what kind of rhythm they're on. You find some lifters who, say peak in 3 weeks. I'm trying to think. I don't think any of us here are on.
I feel like I'm pretty close to 3 weeks.
You're probably the shortest, but even then, we're looking at 4, maybe 5. You know, so in a 4-week rhythm is on the short side. But even if you are on a 3-week rhythm, like if there's 4 weeks that separate those two meets, that's still that would work, I guess, because you would have your 1 week of pivot after Classic Worlds, and then a 3 week block ramping up to the World Games. You know, so you could do it like that, but that's not very common, I find, for people to have like a 3 week rhythm. I find most people are more in the, honestly, I think like 6 is probably about average, you know. And if you're looking at 6 weeks to get to a real peak and you've got to peak again in 4, you know, I'm thinking it's going to be a lot like what Paulie's saying to me. You know, I'm going to try to train through 1 or
just preserve, like even train up to the first one and just preserve strength for the second one.
Yeah, you know, and that's a tricky thing. That's I would much rather do 2 real peaks rather than try to maintain a peak. Maintaining a peak is not an easy thing, and I feel like I've still got a lot of
figuring
learning
out
to do myself. Yeah, for sure.
Especially on such a large time scale, trying to maintain that peak for 4 weeks would be a daunting task, I think.
Yeah,
for the lifter to stay healthy too.
Well, it's exactly right. Like, it's one thing to maintain a peak for a week or 2, but it's something else to maintain it for a month, you know.
And throw another wrench in the plans where you're moving from raw to equipped.
Yeah.
So, you know, in that sense, it might work a little easier because there's more physical demand on the body when you're going from raw to equipped, as far as the loads that you'll be handling. So maybe that's part of the peak, is or strategically to do a raw meet, because I know that a lot of people who are competing in so Benika, for instance, she skipped the Open Nationals, and so that would be doing equipped and then going to from equipped to raw to equipped. I think that would be too much. So maybe going from raw to equipped, there's something that you can do there. And I've worked with athletes who have done that, but it does take a long term. There's the downside to it as well.
The more things that you add into the mix, you know, the more difficult all this gets to be. You know, like you're talking about, if you're a bench specialist, you know, then that's one thing. You have one discipline that you're trying to master, you know, but then if you're a 3 lift power lifter, then, you know, that's 3 disciplines. And now if you're going to say that you're crossover between raw and equipped, well, that's really 6 disciplines that you're trying to master, you know, and that complicates all of training, really. But then your peaking in particular is also more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say train through a bench meet. So I have people, for instance, who are signed up for bench nationals, and then they're going to do raw nationals. That's more of a train through. Like, I don't think we need to slow everything down, go into a peak and then come out of a peak, because there's too much time on either side. I think used up. And with the bench, you know, we just time it properly and they'll just hit their numbers at the meet. Especially if they're going in for raw bench.
I would say as well that the train through aspect is not quite as simple and straightforward as maybe it sounds at first glance, because I've definitely had lifters that will say something like this exact scenario comes up. You know, like, I've got one meet, and then a month later another meet, and we think, you know, well, they're on like a 6 week rhythm, so we'll just train through that first one. Well, invariably, it doesn't quite end up being a real train through. Like, they go to the meet and they maybe get up to second attempts, but
then they get that meet feel and want to go for all out maxes on the third.
But even if they don't, it's still disruptive to training when they get back to it. You know, that it's not like they just pick up in the training cycle right where they left off, like they never did a meet. You know, just the act of being in a meet atmosphere and going to something kind of heavy, that's still disruptive to the normal flow of training, because normally you don't do that.
Yeah, well, so I think actually this is interesting, because we can talk about strategies to prepare for something like that. You know, I think in your typical setup, or in a lot of typical training setups, you have the competition lifts earlier in the week so that all the energy is focused on the competition lifts earlier in the week, and then you have your supplemental and accessory work with accumulated fatigue later in the week. But if you can plan in advance to know that the person has a competition 4 weeks or 5 weeks before their main competition, perhaps you can switch the main lifts to like the last day of the week so that they can become adjusted or accommodated to training squat, bench, and deadlift on Saturday or Sunday, and then it become less disruptive to them leading into the second competition.
Yeah.
That's just something that's something that I definitely done. Whether it's just training for a regular competition without a competition prior, or if I've had a situation where I do have someone who has a competition before the priority competition, I tend to move their main lifts to the weekend so that it's more adjusted to when that first competition comes up.
Yeah. I like that as a template, in general. The caveat that, because everything's trade-offs, right? So the trade-off there is that if you put the competition lifts later in the week, you have to separate them a bit further from the lower priority assistance work so that you're still going into those comp lifts well rested and so that your performance is high. And for some people that can kind of lead into some scheduling difficulty, but in a general sense, I like that as a template just for exactly the reason that you're saying. Even if you don't have meets that are in close proximity to each other, it's useful because you're used to training the comp lifts on, say, a Friday or Saturday or even a Sunday, which for most competitions, that's the day of the week that you're going to be competing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that as a general strategy.
Actually, thinking about day of the week that you're competing leads me into another question or topic that I have. We don't have to talk about it just now, but so Nationals, USAPL Raw Nationals begins Tuesday this year, which is a little bit earlier than it's begun in the past. And so if you have like a 47 or 52 lifter who's going to have to peak much earlier in the training week than, say, a 120 plus lifter, how do you adjust their training to accommodate peaking earlier? So I have 3 lifters who are lifting on Tuesday and Wednesday. So I've played around with their programming to make sure that I'm peaking them on a Tuesday and a Wednesday instead of on a Saturday or Sunday, like a regular local competition. So that's just it's very interesting when you have a competition that's not on the normal day of the week for a regular competition.
Yeah.
I think something like that, a lot of times you can just adjust the training week so that instead of it starting on a Sunday, just start it on a Tuesday. Exactly.
That's what I pretty much did for them.
I actually have I had 3 lifters. I guess I had to do that at Worlds, and actually just 2 is Hannah Chan and Luke Richardson, who competed for the UK. And I think Luke competed on a Tuesday, and Hannah competed on a Wednesday, or the opposite order. And basically what that means is that if my standard meet protocol, which for them, they seem to respond really well to it, with openers on 5 days out, warm-ups 2 to 3 days out. Hannah has definitely responded very well to that. I didn't really know yet with Luke because it's the first time working with him, but it turned out it worked really well for him as well. I got lucky. All we really did is just shift. So I shifted the starting point of 5 to 6 days out, obviously, because 5 to 6 days out is going to be more ahead in the week. And then because he had more like 5 days of rest, I added 1 training session with the competition lifts additional to what he'd be usually doing. So he would basically start his openers on Wednesday or Thursday, and then he actually had a real competition training session with some volume on the Monday or Tuesday. And same thing with Hannah, I just shifted it 1 day back. So they have a little bit more time of rest. You don't need to put in a bunch of other supplemental work or assistance movements, just the competition lifts with some volume, so they can continue to get stronger even if they only have 7 days. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, I'm tracking with you.
It does. If I had paper and write it down and make it a little bit more.
You need visuals. So something I've noticed, I've noticed, like years ago, it seems like, people would take the a week off before a meet. And they would literally just take a full week off, and then they take a week off after a meet. These days, like I especially noticed it when I was at Worlds, where people seem to be like doing full, like intense training sessions throughout the entire meet. And so it just came up a lot more. It seems like there's a shift in kind of bringing training up a lot closer to your day of competition than it has been in the past. Mark, have you noticed that kind of thing? Or like, I mean, because I know that you've been around forever.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah. No, I don't say it in a bad way, but you see these trends. Yeah.
I'm not as old as you are, Paulie, but I have seen some of that. Yeah. I mean, I remember years ago, lifters actually stopped deadlifting like a month out from the meet.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. But things have definitely, we've learned a lot since then. That's for sure.
So you think it's learning, or is it a trend?
I think it's just different types of training methodologies. If you can, like on the type of program that RTS uses, you can detrain very quickly if you just stop. Like, I mean, even I'm going through this right now, or it feels like I'm going through this right now, but you just detrain very quickly because of the frequency and the volume. But if there's the old school of thought where it was like a lot less volume and a lot less frequency, so you didn't have so much training within a short period of time. So if you took those 10 days off, 11 or 12 or a month off, you didn't lose much because your frequency of deadlifting in like a month, let's say, might have been two heavy deadlift sessions in a 4-week period. So if you take that month off, that's like the deload, or whatever you want to call it, is the ratio of the deload is the same to the training methodology that you're using. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Chart, yeah.
That's a good point. And you just put these in context too. I mean, what Paulie's talking about, to put them in context, you're talking about mostly equipped lifting, or pretty much all equipped lifting, first of all. And the frequency, as you said, I mean, I remember, I don't know if any of y'all knew who John Gamble was.
Yeah, I know the name.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think he's a strength coach at the Buffalo Bills or something like that right now. Anyway, I remember he used to never deadlift. I mean, at all. He just squat and bench, and then the only time he deadlifted was in a meet. So, talk about low frequency. That's
twice a year.
There was an article like that used to be a big thing, like the no deadlift routine, like how to get a big deadlift without deadlifting, which I don't know, has definitely gone out of fashion, and I think for good reason. But it's interesting to see how those trends are, and I think it's a mistake to look at some of those trends and think, categorically, we did it worse then, or we're doing it worse now. I don't think people then or now are stupid, and so they're not going to do things that are generally not going to do things that are clearly counterproductive. So I think it's important to be aware of that, and to try to look at it as charitably as we can to figure out what's the essence that's going on there. And Mark, one big thing that you pointed out, I think, is that a lot of it was equipped lifting then, so I think a combination between the training, like popular training methods didn't drive as much frequency as we see now, and most of the lifting was done equipped, which those things go together a lot. Anybody who's ever done equipped lifting knows that you can't lift equipped frequently. You can train that muscle frequently, or you can train that movement pattern frequently, but you can't actually have the bench shirt on 4 times a week. Like, that just is not a thing that really works that well, so kind of those two things interact together, and I think that's probably what drives a lot of the trend. And then, with the changes in popular training methods and kind of the masses moving toward raw lifting, I think that's what's driven a lot of that change, you know. But it's still finding a lot of what works best for you as a lifter, you know. So it was less than ideal, obviously, but this year for Raw Worlds, Kelly Branton got hurt in the lead up to the meet and ended up not doing any really heavy squatting or deadlifting for, I think it was like 5 weeks leading up to the meet. He had very little strength loss. I mean, he wasn't really on his game as much as he would have liked to have been, but if I didn't train for 5 weeks, there would be no way I would be like, it would be an embarrassing display, you know, to step onto a platform.
I think that's another interesting thing to bring up, though. How much does he weigh?
365 pounds.
Right. So you also have to, and I think we've talked about in terms of different training strategies, the size, the physical size of the person. A small person needs more training stimulus and more frequency of training, and a larger person, because of the relative load that they're lifting, is just so much on their central nervous system that they don't need to train as frequently as a 52 lifter, you know. So I think that because of how large the person is, they have an ability to retain holding on to that strength for longer because their frequency is lower. So that goes back to looking at these like 4-week deloads, you know, because the person is lifting so much and training so frequently, infrequently, like lifting heavy, high intensity, low frequency. They retain that strength longer because that's what they're used to doing. Yeah. And that's what their training sets them up for.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and another thing that would be interesting to see is, I wonder if there's a shift in the average weight of your powerlifting competitor from, I don't know, say 2000 to now. Like, I wonder if your average powerlifting competitor was heavier then and is, you know, a bit more average now, you know, closer to population average.
So are you saying that 10, 15 years ago, the average power lifter was a lot, like, it was more like heavier weight classes, and now the powerlifting population seems to be filling out the lighter weight classes? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I'm certainly not making the claim.
No, is this your question? Is that what you're
I'm genuinely curious about it. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. You know, I mean, if you think of powerlifting as a less popular sport, who's going to be drawn to powerlifting as a sport?
Well, I think that females have been more drawn to the sport in the last like 5 to 10 years. Like at my first in 2012, at my first powerlifting competition, there were like, three girls. And now I go to, I mean, Paulie can attest to this too. He has a day that's almost all girls. When you split the competition into 2 days, you have the lighter weight classes on day one, and it's like all of the females and the small males, you know? And then, so I think just from what I've seen since 2012 in the last 5 years, there have been more and more and more females in the sport. So that's going to fill out the smaller weight classes.
Right.
I still think there's a bell curve. I mean, when I look at the way that meets go,
of course.
You know, we're still, you know, any team would be happy to have a 47 or even a 52 on their team. And then there's, you know, then we get into the 63s and 74s, which there's that seems to be the mass of the women there. And there's still talk of people wanting to add an extra weight class for women so that they can match the number of weight classes for men. So we'd go up maybe another 10 kilos. So we'd have like a 94 or 95 kilo weight class, which I think would be great for women, because there's a lot of women that sit in that range.
Yeah, I mean, the 84 plus is so wide. You know, you look at the smallest 84 plus and you look at the largest 84 plus, and you can't compare the size of the females in that weight class. So that would be really interesting if they added an additional weight class.
There's a lot of really talented lifters that fit in that category. It would make, I think it'd make for a really fun, interesting battle to see, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, we presented something. We'll see. I mean, we've been pushing something through, trying to get the IPF to adopt an extra weight class, and then that would trickle down to us to adopt an extra weight class, which I think would be cool, because I know I train a whole bunch of lifters who would very much rather be, you know, sit at 90 kilos rather than have to cut. But that being said, I'm seeing more lifters that are sitting up in that range too. More women who are not concerned with cutting as much and filling out the top of the weight classes as well, which is great. I think that's very positive.
Yeah, there's definitely been, just coming from a female perspective, in the last few years, there's been, if you follow a lot of the women on social media, there's been this like body positive, all-inclusive type, don't stress about the weight movement, which has been really good for women, I think, because, with weight, especially with weight class athletes, there's always this emphasis to like control your weight, get to the lighter weight class, go through weight water cuts or weight cuts, and it puts a lot of stress on the body. But not having to stress about cutting down to a lighter weight class just so you don't have to compete against someone who's 15 to 20 kilos heavier than you because you're in the 84 plus because you sit at 90 kilos, but you can't cut to 84. I think that would be huge for women.
Yeah, no, but I mean, this is what Mike, you'd mentioned before, how Raw is exploding, but I think that Raw lifting is starting to normalize, because initially somebody could drop a weight class and be competitive. Now you can't. Like there are definite people who are sitting at the top of every weight class who are just ready to just knock you off, and if you drop a weight class, that's not going to do a thing for you. Right. So people, I think, are coming back to accepting where they are and trying to optimize where they are, which I think is great.
I mean, that's definitely true. 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, I wanted to drop to 63 to be more competitive and try and qualify for Worlds. But if I dropped to 63 now, I probably would still be in the top 4. I don't think I would be the top lifter anymore at this point. Then 2 years ago, I would have been. But now everyone's just getting so strong. It's getting so competitive. It's hard. It's killing me.
Oh, Rory.
I think the same goes as far as filling out the age brackets too. I've noticed that, like the competition in the M1s is holy crap.
A lot of times that's as difficult as it is to compete in the open division as well. A lot of open champions are M1s, which is amazing.
Well, is that you saying you're ready for M2, Mark?
Yeah, I'm ready to
M3.
Shut up, Ollie.
That's true. You're almost there.
Hey, my next Worlds, yes, I will be in M3.
That's what I'm saying. Everybody thinks I'm being mean to Mark. I'm not. I'm being honest.
I was calling him a young guy.
Well, he's still a young guy. He's
At least we're not making fun of Jim for being so young today.
No, Jim's hairy today. I don't know why you're so hairy.
Jim was sitting over there thinking, like, don't draw attention to yourself. Don't draw attention to yourself.
That's why he's leaning so far back. But no, like M1's to what Mark is saying, like I saw it firsthand. Obviously, it's like M1s, M2s are killing it. Brits took M2s away this year, but the M1s, M2s are just as strong as a lot of the open lifters. Obviously, if we've got Dave Ricks competing as an open, so
Dave Ricks and others on Team USA with Marissa Inda and Susie Gary.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's others that I'm not recalling off the top of my head, but
no, I mean, look, Alicia Webb could have gone either way, and she sat with us this year, which was great. I mean, she had a perfect 500 total for an 84. I think she dominated everybody by about 100 kilos. It's M1s are M2s are nothing to mess with now.
Yeah.
No, and Tony Harris wasn't there; he was deployed. But I mean, same thing there.
Yeah.
And he's going to be an M2 for a while. And this is the guy that won the 120 open class, right, at Nationals.
Had a just recently set a world record in the squat, and I guess Dennis just took it back in Belarus. But I mean, so Tony would have set that world record at the Arnold, and as an M2 to set an open world record in anything is just amazing. It was really fun to watch.
No, it's fun. We're going to see a lot more of that going forward too, especially because the open lifters are getting older, obviously, and they'll start filling out the weight classes and the age classes even more.
Shh. Stop it.
Pepper's being nice and quiet today. Hope she's sleeping. She weighs 7 pounds now. She gained 2.
What is she?
She is my
Bulk and
puppy.
hay?
A bulk of hay?
No, it says I've adapted. I've been traveling Europe, right? And so I'm adapting all these new languages, variations of English. I said she's bulking, hay.
Barking, hay.
Bulking hay.
Bulking.
Bulking, yeah. No, I think she's a little fat, but.
Jim, I think you have to master English before you adopt other languages.
That's a good point.
All right, so just quickly here, I wanted to talk about peaking a little bit more before we wrap this up. But one thing that I had to talk about, a lot of people talk about kind of this rebound effect that they get from their peaking strategy. So you intentionally overtrain a bit, and then during the taper, magically you get a lot stronger. That's been a thing that I don't see and haven't seen ever in my coaching career or competing. And I've looked for it. I've tried to get it to work. It's a thing that I've never been able to get to work, this rebound effect. And as far as I can tell, what people are seeing when they see this rebound effect is kind of a combination of 2 things. One, it's an inability to really accurately assess performance during the training cycle, meaning like they're in the thick of it to really tell where that lifter is at strength-wise, to get a really good estimation. And I don't mean that as like a slam against people who use this kind of peaking strategy. I just don't think they're getting quite as accurate of an estimation of athlete performance as they think they are. And then the other piece of it, I think they're working with people who are really strong meet day performers. And so when they show up at a meet, they perform magnificently one way or another. So it looks as if they're getting a really strong rebound effect from this taper. But when in fact, I think they're just really strong extroverts. So anyway, that's my observation. I just kind of wanted to put that out there. Have any of you guys seen this kind of rebound effect from peaking strategies?
No, I think you're right. I think it comes down to being able to observe what's going on during the training cycles. I know that you have a lot of tools on your website to monitor this type of stuff, but I don't, like for my own lifters, I don't use the RTS website to track anything, because they have their own logs. But in their logs, I do track estimated 1RM over the course of all training cycles. And even if you just looking at that, so if you track nothing, if you just write down, in your training journal, you just write down what you did on that day, maybe you're logging RPE, but you're never looking at any type of trend. So even just looking at estimated 1RM, then you don't know what your trend is. So if it feels, or it might look like something, a boost on meet day. But I typically find if you can just track estimated 1RM, then at least for me, just looking at estimated 1RM, everyone pretty much performs exactly as what their trend looks like on meet day. So I used to be and I think that even just thinking about it now, it's more of a realization than it has been in the past. But I definitely think that in the past I had that, overtraining, super compensation kind of idea. But you're right, it never really pans out. If you actually track at least one metric, which I think if you're going to just track one metric, it should be estimated 1RM, that you don't get that whoop on meet day. It's like
Right.
If you can track your estimated 1RM, you can pretty much predict what you're going to do on meet day. So
yeah, especially if you can get a pretty accurate assessment of a lifter's estimated 1RM, and there's a bunch of different tools out there to get a better view of that. You know, whether you want to incorporate velocity into that or whatever. But I think people feel better after the taper, and that kind of contributes to that feeling.
Yeah, the fatigue has dissipated. They feel fresher on meet day.
Sure, and that's fine. But you know, so one thing that I've done more recently in terms of our peaking strategies is I've very carefully measured how long is it taking a lifter to reach their peak performance in training, and then we basically time that up for the competition. So the taper gets really, really small. You know, you rest for 2 or 3 days, and no, you don't feel that same feeling of like having rested for a week and a half or something like that. But it's reliable in that it produces a high performance. And from you know, an athletic perspective, that's the most important thing. You know, I don't mind so much if you don't feel great, but if you perform great, that's the thing that's important. You know, and of course there's those things aren't completely separate from one another. They're definitely intermingled. So they have to feel good enough to perform well, but we have those, and people will talk about it in a training environment, right? Like we all have these days where we go into the gym, we feel like crap, but then set a PR. But in a competition environment, we don't acknowledge that that's a possibility or that that's a thing that can happen, you know? So I would say be much more interested in performance rather than the subjective feeling.
I would agree.
Thank God somebody agrees with me.
Well, no, I think, I mean, how many times have you as a coach had, you know, like 2 or 3 weeks out from a competition, someone says, oh, I feel like crap, this is not going well. And you just have to remind them, like, you might feel like crap for a week or 2, but, you know, on you should feel like, at least all the lifters that I work with, you know, 2 or 3 weeks out from a competition start to feel like crap. And I think it's because intensity picks up, nerves pick up leading up to a competition. So the intensity's high, their nerves are high, and everything starts to be, if they're cutting weight. Shit hits the fan those 3 weeks before the competition. But a good coach will recognize that and know that and reassure their lifter that these are normal feelings before competition. Trust the process, and on meet day, you're going to perform exactly how we have planned for you to perform on meet day. So unless something is like totally out of the normal for that lifter on meet day, then yeah, I mean, ignore feelings on meet day. You know, I mean, just for an example for me, like I usually feel like very nervous on meet day, and my performance is very high, even though I feel like I'm very nervous, but I never feel like utter shit on meet day, except for at the Arnold, something was definitely wrong with me. I felt like crap. I've never felt so crappy at a competition before. And then 4 days later, I ended up with bronchitis, you know? So, you know, I was blaming it on the weight cut. I was blaming it on like all different things. But when you look at it, like and I even like looked at the pictures that Adam had taken, and I was like pale and like eerie looking on competition day. And then 4 days later, I had bronchitis. So, you know, we adjusted in the competition based on how I was feeling, because I don't typically feel like that on competition day. So yes, ignore like bad feelings on competition day, only if they're not like out of the ordinary. You know?
Yeah. I would kind of put that in with focusing on performance. You know, feelings are there. They need to be acknowledged, and Paulie can probably speak to that a bit. But you know, it's
I don't have feelings.
Paulie doesn't have feelings. He's just like a third-party observer of feelings.
Exactly. No, feelings are real. Feelings are real.
Well, yeah. So we adjusted. You know, you adjust your meet day expectations. You adjust the attempts. And if you look at it, an outsider might have, like everybody was like, oh, you did so great. You went 9 for 9. But yeah, we adjusted based on my feelings. And so the performance was still good. In my head, I didn't do so well, but
because you have those expectations
well.
leading,
you know, you perform as well as you could given the circumstances on that day.
It's also important that you're looking, so if you have a client, they've been working with you for a year or 2 years, what happens every meet? What trends can you look at that consistently they feel bad 3 weeks out? If they don't consistently feel bad 3 weeks out, and they also respond well to that feeling on meet day, and now they're feeling bad 3 weeks out, you might not, maybe they're going to be okay, but you got to make sure you're communicating with them earlier than later, preferably. And then, the next week and week out, just make small adjustments. Maybe they are just really fatigued and they need to taper a little earlier. So I think that's really important too.
I've had a lifter recently who was peaking for a meet, and she would always, like, performance-wise, she would always like improve for 2 weeks and then have a small dip, and then improve for 2 weeks and then have a small dip, and just kind of really reliably exhibited that pattern. And as you're getting closer to a competition, we got to that dip, and then I got some messages that came in that were nervous, a little panicky. Not panicky, that's a bit too strong a word, but like, hey, what's going on? We need to fix something. And I was able to show her this graph, and say, look, this is normal. This is how it always works for you. So yes, this is a dip, but now there's going to be 2 good performances, and on that peak performance, that's when the competition is. So it's just what Jim's saying, just kind of attaching a visual to it if something like that's available, saying, hey, this is what happens with you every time we do this, so this is normal and you're going to be fine. Same sort of thing if we do have a lifter that does a more traditional taper, say they maybe hit openers 5 or 6 days out. A lot of times those openers are a bit slower than you would like for them to be. That's okay as the fatigue dissipates for the rest of the week. And I did go on to say that, this huge performance rebound doesn't happen, and it doesn't, but there's maybe a subtle performance improvement. Why else would you do a taper at all?
That's not a rebound, though. I mean,
it's just a dissipation of fatigue. It's just performing up to your potential. So if you go, that's a little bit slower than I'd like my opener, and it's 5 or 6 days out, like, okay, you're probably going to be fine. That's a normal experience, but it doesn't go from like looking like a second attempt 5 or 6 days out to going to an opener, on competition day. That doesn't happen.
But I think this ties into what we talked about in the last podcast about paying attention. Even if you don't have a coach, just track things. Having just so if you want to improve your abilities to perform better or well, then just keeping a training log where you're not looking at the overall picture and the overall trends isn't going to help you. Turning the page to 4 weeks back and looking how you did 4 weeks back versus looking at how you've done over the course of the 4 weeks or how you've done over the course of the last 12 weeks isn't going to help you. Just, you know what I'm saying? But looking at the trends over 12 weeks is going to help you more than not looking at anything other than a specific day. So just, even if you don't have the RTS, even if you don't use the tools on the RTS website, just create something for yourself that allows you to track things enough so that you can watch trends in performance and pay attention to your trends in performance, which I think will help you prepare for your peaks a little bit better.
Good thing is it's free for everyone to use.
It is, and it's free. It's free.
Yeah, and also I wanted to add, going back to what Jim was saying about paying attention to individual lifters, I think there's also, we're talking about peaking in general, and I think we need to also break it down into the individual lifts, because I've noticed, with my lifters that, maybe somebody in particular, knowing this person needs more bench volume leading up to a meet, and not so much, it's not that way with deadlift. Maybe back off on the deadlift a little bit or whatever. So that's another thing about having a little bit of history and actually paying attention and knowing the lifter and what they need.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, the trend that we mentioned earlier about people deloading tapering their deadlifts like way earlier than the other lifts. I don't think that's a completely invalid strategy. I think for a lot of I would say averagely built lifters, it's maybe not necessary, but I've coached a number of lifters who are really great benchers, really, well, comparatively not so great deadlifters. For those people, it does seem like they need less frequency training for the deadlift and a bit longer taper for the deadlift. I mean, I guess it still kind of sticks to what Rory was saying earlier about the tapering length matching up to your overall training frequency. So that probably makes sense. But in that sense of, like, for people that are really not built for one particular lift, that maybe training it a bit less frequency, tapering it a bit longer might be a reasonable strategy. So, Mark, I think is that more or less what you were getting at as well, or you're kind of maybe took you off topic a bit there.
No, I think that was right on topic. Just a little different way of looking at it. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but that makes sense. Yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts that you guys have on peaking? Any other tactics or techniques that you guys use when getting a lifter to peak for competition?
Well, see, now I'm excited about nationals.
Finally, this is all it took for 6 of us to sit here on a podcast and talk about.
That's all it took.
Right.
Talk about peaking, and she wants to go to nationals now.
But here's the thing: we need to track Rory's excitement about nationals. So if we see where, if this is a peak, if this is your natural for excitement about nationals, let's see how many more times we can get you.
I had a big dip last night.
Right. So does that mean we have to do a podcast right before nationals?
Yes, let's do it.
New training metric incoming, so you'll be able to track that on the RTS
track
website.
The podcast.
How excited are you about nationals? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, thanks everyone for sitting in and sharing your thoughts and your knowledge on peaking with us. Enjoyed having you guys, and thanks everybody for watching. And we'll see you guys next time.
Reactive Training Systems.